Great, we like it when new people come. So last time we met, we had a conversation about DACA and recent developments for individuals in the United States without documentation. And we thought that it would be really useful for you to hear from an expert on immigration law. And so we reached out to Sarah Dady, who is a local attorney, and she specializes in immigration law. And she often goes in the community and does what she calls Know Your Rights sessions to help people learn about their immigration rights. And we wanted to bring her here to give us that same information. So I'm really excited that she's here. Before we give her the mic, I need to invite Ladavia for a moment, who's going to read a statement. It also happens to be that Sarah Dady is running for Congress, and as a candidate for office, we have to make this statement.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hi, everybody. It's so dry. Hi, how are you? Okay, good afternoon. My name is Ladavia Joyce. I work upstairs with the Dean of Students Office. Before we get started, I just wanted to read the statement for the political presence. Okay, so this program is a chance for students to get to know Sarah and to be educated on the rights of U.S. immigrants. With all political events going on campus, the college doesn't endorse or advocate for a candidate for a political office. Okay? Thank you. Have a good time. Enjoy the conversation.
All right, without further ado, Sarah Dady.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you to Rock Valley College. I am very happy here to talk about my favorite subject, but my husband says that it's also my only subject. I have been practicing family-based immigration law and deportation defense for 12 years. I am a Rockford native, and my firm is in downtown Rockford. We are the largest immigration law firm west of Chicagoland, because as you may realize, we have a very large immigrant population in this area. Not just Winnebago County, but Boone and McHenry and Ogle and Lee and Stevenson and Joe Davies. So it's been an ongoing issue in our community, and most of that's the fault of Congress, of the federal government, because we have a very broken immigration system. I've been practicing immigration law now under 3 presidential administrations, started with George W. Bush, then President Obama, and now President Trump. So I'd like to keep this casual. I'm sure people have a lot of questions about immigration law, but if you think it would be helpful, I'm happy to offer some context, a little bit about what the problems are with our immigration system, or some myths. The number one myth is it's easy to immigrate to the United States. People just have to wait their turn in line. Well, for the vast majority of people who are here unlawfully, there was no line for them to get in the first place. There are 4 major ways to immigrate to the United States, and immigrate means have the intent to live and work permanently in the United States, otherwise known as a green card. That's what an immigrant is, someone who's going to live here permanently. The number one way people immigrate to the United States is through a family member. So a U.S. citizen's spouse, parent, adult U.S. citizen child, or a lawful permanent resident spouse or parent. And lawful permanent resident means green card holder. It's the same thing. While we offer unlimited visa numbers for immediate relatives of U.S. citizens, that means there's no waiting in line, there is no line. There's a visa number immediately available. We limit the numbers of visas in other categories. So we limit the numbers of visas available for adult children of U.S. citizens, and if you're from Mexico and you're an adult child of a U.S. citizen, you're going to wait about 26 years before there's a visa number available. We also limit visa numbers for spouses and unmarried children of permanent residents, and you're going to wait about 2 or 3 years for a visa number if you're in that category. And we also limit visa numbers for adult married children of U.S. citizens and siblings of U.S. citizens. And again, you're going to wait about 20 years for a visa number. If you do not fall into one of those categories, there is no way for you to immigrate to the United States through a family member. It doesn't exist. There's no line for you to get in. The second major way people immigrate to the United States is by having an employer petition for them for permanent residency. And again, that's divided into categories. So if you don't fall into one of those categories, there's no line for you. The third major way is the diversity lottery, which is a lottery. We have this idea that we want diversity in the United States, but we want it to be balanced. So many countries, people can throw their name in the hat, and if their name gets pulled out, they can apply for a diversity lottery. Mexico is not included in the diversity lottery because we have decided, Congress has decided, we have too many Mexicans in the United States. They're overrepresented in diversity, so they don't get to participate in the diversity lottery. And then the fourth major way people come to the United States is as asylum seekers or refugees, because they couldn't stay in their home countries due to war, internal conflict, natural disaster, and then they get resettled in the United States, and eventually they can apply for a green card. So those are the four major ways. If you don't fall into one of those four major categories, there is no way for you to come to the United States permanently, lawfully. It just doesn't exist. Low-skilled worker visas, we also limit. So employers that need seasonal help, like mostly in agriculture, farmers need workers to bring in the harvest. We offer low-skilled worker visas, but the time it takes from the time an employer files the applications for it, the interviews, and the issuance of the visas, usually we're well into harvest by the time any of those visas get approved. This year, we were 22 days into harvest before any of those visas were issued. So anyone here familiar with farming background? Do you think crops can sit in the fields waiting 22 days for visas to be approved? No, they can't. On top of that, there are non-seasonal, low-skilled jobs that we need filled. For example, dairy farms. The state of Wisconsin alone employs 5,000 dairy workers. And they depend on immigration to fill those positions. Unfortunately, we don't have a low-skilled or ag worker visa that is year-round permanent. So, what do? People come in because our economy demands they come in and work. We don't give them a lawful way to come in, and now they're here, they're undocumented, they had no way to apply for legal status in the first place, and they continue to not have a way to apply for legal status. So that's kind of a brief overview of our immigration system. Are there any questions on that point yet? How about highly skilled workers? You know, the United States does not graduate enough native-born citizens in sciences, engineering, and medicine. So we also depend on foreign workers to fill those slots. So we have H-1B visas, which are for highly skilled workers. And those visas we limit to 65,000 per year. But employers have a need for more than 65,000 per year. So what happens is the first week of April, when the H-1B visas become available, FedEx actually has to reroute trucks because Immigration Service receives about 200,000 H-1B applications from employers. So it's a problem. And it's a problem when we don't tie the availability of visa numbers to actual economic demand in our country. But it's been that way for more than 25 years.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
Karen, sorry. It's me, the voice.
Where's the-
I'm right here, sorry.
Matt!
I'll stand up. There you
Yes.
go. So, what I hear you saying is that if, let's say I'm in the country without documentation, and I want to remain in the country and gain legal status, unless I fall into some of those categories, there's no way in, or it's an extremely long way. If I don't have family members, if I don't have an employer who's gonna sponsor me, like what, literally, is there any, do I have to leave and come back once the visa opens up? Like, what is could you explain the pathway again, or the,
If you don't fall into one of those categories, there is no pathway for you. And if you leave, well, fine, you have no way to come back. And, you know, most of the 11 million or so undocumented people in our country, and undocumented means two things. It means people who came into the United States without permission, so with no visa. And it also means people who came in with permission, but then they overstayed their permission. For example, a tourist visa. So usually people who come in with a tourist visa are authorized to be here for 6 months, but then if they overstay, they're in violation of their visa. We call them undocumented as well, because they're not authorized to be here. So undocumented means both of those things. So we've got 11 million people in this country who, if they had a way to apply for legal status, they would. It's not that they're choosing not to, it's that they don't have a way to apply for it. So, at this point, even people who are married to a US citizen, there might be a visa number immediately available to them, but that doesn't mean they're gonna get it. Because having someone who can petition for you, falling into a category is just the first step. The second step is you have to prove you don't have immigration violations that disqualify you from that visa. And people who have been here unlawfully for a long time often have immigration violations that disqualify them. Yes, there's a question.
You said there's about 11 million undocumented people in this country. How much of an economic impact does that make on us? Because that's a pretty large chunk of our population. We live in a country of about 300 million people, so that's a lot.
Well, it's 3.5% of total US population, so it's actually not that big. But as far as economic impact, they have a huge economic impact. And here's a good example, Social Security. Does everyone here know how Social Security works? Who's here over the age of 20? Who knows how it works? So the way Social Security works is the generation that's working is paying for the generation that's retired, right? So the key to it is we need more people working than we have people retiring. So I'm paying for my father's Social Security check right now, because I'm working and paying into Social Security. And when he worked, he was paying for his father's Social Security. That's how it works. So Social Security takes money out of your paycheck, right? And then they give you credit for the money that you're paying in through your paycheck. And they know it's you based on your name and your Social Security number. Undocumented workers make up Social Security numbers, or they buy Social Security numbers that don't belong to them, and they work under them. So when Social Security gets the money from their employer, Social Security goes, hey, wait a minute, there's a problem. There's a no match between the name and the Social Security number, or maybe the Social Security number is not legitimate. So then they send the employer a letter and say, hey, this is a no match, please fix it. And the employer is under no legal obligation to fix it. So usually what the employer does is just throw the letter in the garbage. And nothing happens. So Social Security gets this money in, but they don't know who to credit it to, so it goes into what they call their suspense file. So we know what money goes into the suspense file. It's people that don't have legitimate Social Security numbers. That's what it is. And over the last 10 years, $520 billion has been paid into the suspense file for Social Security. Every year, approximately $13 billion is put in the suspense file from no matches. So we know exactly where that money is coming from. The head actuary of Social Security has said that Social Security would become insolvent much sooner if it were not for the undocumented workers paying into that suspense file. Also, undocumented people pay taxes. How can that possibly be, you might ask? Well, luckily, the IRS has solved that little problem. The IRS has created something called an individual taxpayer identification number for people who have earned income in the United States but who have no social security number. The IRS really doesn't care where your income comes from as long as you pay your taxes on it. So the ITIN is what people who do not have a legitimate social security number use to pay their taxes. And they file ITIN returns for state income taxes and federal income taxes to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars a year filing tax returns. They also pay property taxes because you don't have to be a US citizen or permanent resident to buy property in the United States. They also pay sales taxes. So they pay much more than they take from the United States, and study after study after study concludes that. So if we lost 11 million people, think about 3% of the population who are working and paying taxes gone, like that. It would have a significant economic impact, and not a positive one.
I just want to clarify, so they pay taxes then, so they wouldn't get a tax return at all, you're saying that, they would just be paying it? Or,
Well, the way taxes work is if during the year, you have money deducted from your check to pay your taxes, and then at the end of the year, you add up your tax, how much you earned, and then your deductions, and if you paid more in than you were required to, you get a refund. So it's true for anyone.
Have there been any major propositions to like fix the issue, to like give visas to these 11 million people, or like get a new way to give them citizenship?
Absolutely, repeatedly, often. Starting with President Reagan. You guys are probably too young to remember President Reagan. President Reagan, a Republican, he's the one that signed into law the amnesty for millions of agricultural workers who are here working undocumented in the United States. What he proposed, in addition to the amnesty, was actually to set up a worker visa program that would be tied to our actual economic need for labor. That second piece of it was never done in the late 1980s. So then during the 90s, when our economy was booming, and we had all of this demand for labor for low-skilled and high-skilled, but especially low-skilled, there was no way for people to come lawfully. So then we saw a huge increase in the undocumented population in the 1990s. In 1997, President Clinton signed an immigration bill, but what it did was set up more obstacles to applying for lawful status and didn't set up any new ways for people to come here lawfully. So it created more reasons to deny people visas if they've been living here undocumented in the United States. George W. Bush pushed really, really hard to try to get immigration reform passed during his first and second terms, and Congress lacked the will. President Obama started out his first term with just deportation enforcement, enforcing the deportation laws. That resulted in President Obama deporting more people during his first 2 years in office than George W. Bush did in 8. In Obama's second term, the cries of the community, because these are people who've been living here for, most of them, more than 20 years, since the 90s they came. They have families, they have US citizen children, many of them are married to US citizens. President Obama said, okay, look, we got 11 million undocumented people in this country, which, as an aside, we reached our peak in immigration in 2005. There are actually now at this point more people leaving the United States than coming into the United States, but immigration peaked in 2005. President Obama said, if we try to deport 11 million people, It's gonna take, 20 years, and it's gonna cost us hundreds of billions of dollars. And the budget for the Department of Homeland Security that oversees deportations for the whole Department of Homeland Security is $60 billion a year. So it's not practical. And that's when President Obama said, okay, look, we're gonna prioritize. We're gonna prioritize people who pose a danger to the United States. Terrorists, drug traffickers, gangbangers. They're top of the list priority for Immigration and Customs Enforcement to arrest and put in deportation proceedings. Then after them, people who've been convicted of a felony, any kind of a felony. After them, people who've been convicted of a misdemeanor, like a DUI or domestic battery, drug possession. And then after them, people who've been convicted of 3 or more misdemeanors and so on and so forth. Down at the bottom of the list, he put the people we know as DACAs. Those are kids that came in under the age of 16, don't have a certain criminal record, were here on certain dates, and are going to school or graduated or served in the US military. DACAs are at the bottom of Obama's priority list, and that's why they enjoy temporary protection from deportation and a work permit that has to be renewed every 2 years. DACA is not real legal status. It was created by executive authority, just as part of the priority list. That's what President Trump rescinded on September 5th. President Trump, after he took office, said, there is no more priority list. Anyone who is here in violation of our immigration laws is a priority for deportation. Everyone. Does that answer your question about why haven't we fixed it? Because Congress lacks the will is the bottom line. Congress has lacked the will.
I'm gonna pause for a moment and remember that I forgot to announce something very important, and that's that there's cookies here in the back. Also, if any of you are here for a class and you need to sign in, we've got some sign-in sheets over at the
Oh,
stage.
logic, that's right. Logic. Well, our immigration system is an exercise in illogic. Which is, here's a good example. All right, so a lot of Americans have this idea that immigration violations are crimes, right? That people that violate our immigration laws are criminals because someone who breaks the law must be a criminal. Our immigration laws are civil. These are civil violations. They're federal civil violations. And that's a difference. When someone is arrested for a crime, what do the police have to do? Come on, you guys better know this.
Read them their rights.
Yes, what are your rights? What does a police officer have to tell you when you are being arrested for a crime? You have the right to remain silent. You have the right, and if you can't afford one, that's exactly right. Now, when you are pulled over for speeding, does a police officer read you your rights? Why not?
Because the rights don't have to be read until right before question.
It's because a speeding ticket is not a criminal offense. It's a civil offense, like a parking ticket. Those are civil offenses. So a police officer is not making an arrest for a criminal offense. So it's different. Also, an example of civil offenses are people that don't file their taxes by April 15th and haven't filed for an extension. When you fail to pay your taxes and file your return, that is a civil offense. Or if you do your taxes wrong and the IRS comes out and audits you, that is a civil offense, and that's a civil process. You have the right to an attorney, but not a free one during an IRS audit. And that's a big difference. Immigration violations are all civil violations as well. And when someone's approached by an ICE officer, they do have the right to remain silent. They do have the right to refuse to answer any questions. They do have the right to an attorney to represent them, but not a free one. There is no public defender's office for immigrants who are arrested by ICE and put in deportation proceedings. If they can afford a private attorney, then they get one. If they can't, too bad. And we've started this entanglement of our civil immigration system with our criminal justice system by housing immigrant detainees, civil detainees, in county jails, which ICE does throughout this area. We successfully fought that off in Winnebago County, which I'm very proud of our county. Good job, everyone. And I see some people say like, I don't know what they're talking about, but yes, be proud of our county. So locking people up for civil offenses is not something we do in the United States except for immigration. We do it for immigration. And President Clinton signed that law in 1996. And actually the law is ICE needs to fill 34,000 immigrant detainee beds per night in this country. And that's the law. Of course, they're looking for more, and they do fill a lot more. So, yes.
Why would they have to build that amount of spaces, like what if there's arrests?
That's an excellent question, but remember, in the 1990s, we were very aware in 1996 of our large undocumented population. And so anytime you have a problem, you can approach it one of two ways. You can say, well, let's use the stick or let's use the carrot, right? We have a whole bunch of people who are in the country here in violation of our immigration laws. Let's get tough on them and pass some really tough laws that make it virtually impossible for them to apply for legal status, or out and out impossible. And then let's also say we're gonna lock you up on top of it, but without actually making it a criminal offense. Because if you make it a criminal offense, the full protections of our United States Constitution come into play. If you keep it a civil offense, then you can limit the due process rights of our Constitution, if you keep it as a civil offense. Yes?
So just to clarify, going back, you're talking about rights when being arrested. And you said for immigration, you have the right to an attorney, but not one to be appointed to you. So I assume that also goes for a legal resident who's arrested on suspicion of being undocumented. If they can't afford an attorney, they're just kind of out of luck. Is that correct?
That is correct. People with green cards and people who are here on valid visas can also be subject to deportation if they get certain immigration violations. If they get convicted of certain offenses, they're deportable. For example, someone who has a green card can be subject to mandatory immigration detention and deportation if they get 2 shoplifting offenses. 2 misdemeanor shoplifting offenses make a permanent resident deportable and subject to mandatory detention. They're treated exactly the same way as a permanent resident who is convicted of murder. Mandatory detention and deportation. Because that's our US immigration law. Here's another example. Someone who is convicted of a crime involving moral turpitude, which is theft crimes like shoplifting. 1 felony conviction for a crime involving moral turpitude disqualifies someone from a green card and also makes a green card holder deportable if it happens within their first 5 years of getting the green card. So what's a crime involving moral turpitude? Who can tell me? Besides theft, because I already gave you that one. Give me another example of a crime involving moral turpitude. Yeah, the courts don't even know. So it's taken on a case-by-case basis, a statute-by-statute basis. You know, typically theft crimes are crimes involving moral turpitude, fraud crimes are crimes involving moral turpitude. Possession of a false ID is not a crime involving moral turpitude, but use of a false ID is. In Illinois, when someone's arrested and charged with possession or use of a false ID, that's always how it's charged, possession or use, And unless that person has an immigration attorney to say, okay, make sure that they're only being convicted of possession, if they end up being convicted of use, that disqualifies them from a green card in the future, and if they're a permanent resident in their first 5 years, that makes them deportable. But who would know that? Immigration lawyers know it, but who else would know that? Also, registering to vote makes a permanent resident deportable. That's a false claim to US citizenship. If they go down to the DMV and end up inadvertently registered to vote, they're still deportable for making a false claim to citizenship, even if they did not intend to register to vote. The fact that their signature appears on that little form below the box that says, I swear under penalty of perjury that I am at least 18 years old and a citizen of the United States, that's it. That's all.
It's really interesting you say that. I'm a green card holder, and when I went to the DMV, they asked me multiple times, do you want to register to vote? I said, no. Do you want to register to vote? No. Are you sure you don't want to register to vote? No, I don't want to register to vote. And I had no idea that I could be deported if I said yes.
Good boy, good boy. You have to stand your ground, and then could you imagine coupling that if your English isn't the best? You know? I'm a little bit on the one hand, as a US citizen, I'm delighted that Illinois is committed to registering all US citizens to vote, right, through this new legislation. As an immigration lawyer, I'm deeply worried that many of my clients will end up automatically registered to vote through this very well-intended law in Illinois, but the Department of Homeland Security isn't going to make allowances for this new state law. It could become a huge problem.
I wanted to ask you about that relationship between federal law and state agencies and local agencies. I know in some states, law enforcement agencies have started inquiring about immigration status, and there's been different debates around that. Could you kind of survey that, just what's the relationship, your obligation, what's illegal, what's not, in terms of state and local agencies and immigration?
Sure. All right, so this is the entanglement of our civil immigration system with our criminal justice system, which are two separate things. All right. Under President Obama in his first term, he really amped up the entanglement of immigration with local criminal law enforcement. He started a program called Secure Communities, which electronically transmits the fingerprints of anyone who's arrested for a crime and booked into a county jail. Their fingerprints are transmitted to the Department of Homeland Security. And if the Department of Homeland Security thinks that that person's here in violation of our immigration laws, they would fax over a piece of paper to the county jail and say, hey, once that person posts their bond on the criminal charge, like driving on suspended license, we want you to hold on to them for 48 hours to give us time to come out and pick them up. Those are called ICE detainers or immigration holds. And they started doing this across the United States. So under President Obama's first term, with everyone that was being put in deportation proceedings, the vast majority of them didn't have a serious criminal record. Some of them didn't have a criminal record at all, but they've been booked into a jail and then the charge later dismissed, or they were acquitted. But yet they were being held and ICE was scooping them up. So the jails became one-stop shopping for ICE. We ended up deporting more people without a criminal record than with a criminal record. And the immigration community and the immigration advocates had this huge outcry. So finally in 2014, President Obama terminated all of these partnership programs with county jails and local police. They're like, nope, we're scooping up the wrong people, this isn't working, and it's too burdensome on our deportation system because we have only a limited number of immigration courts and judges. So, we can hire a whole bunch more ICE agents, but we're not hiring more immigration judges, and we're not opening up more immigration courts. So there's only a limited number of cases that they can get through day to day. We have over 40,000 immigration cases pending at the Chicago Immigration Court. One of my clients went to court this week and got a notice that our next hearing date will be in 2020. Because that's how backlogged the Chicago Immigration Court is, so nothing happens fast. In any event, so President Obama terminated the Secure Communities program, but that infrastructure is still there. So President Trump reinitiated Secure Communities in January of this year through executive order. He also called on local law enforcement to receive training and sign contracts with ICE to enforce civil immigration laws. As it stands, normally, no local police officer has the authority to enforce civil law, whether it's state or federal. You know, how many of you have ever been asked by a police officer, did you file your taxes April 15th? No, because that's civil law. That's not what they do. They investigate crimes. They enforce criminal law, not civil. So a police officer generally has no authority to ask anyone what their immigration status is. I mean, they can ask, but if someone says, well, I'm undocumented, Rockford Police Department doesn't have authority to arrest somebody for a civil immigration violation. Only ICE has that authority, unless they enter into a contract with ICE and receive training to do that. Here in Illinois, we recently passed the Trust Act, which prohibits local law enforcement and county and state law enforcement from entering into those contracts with ICE. It prohibits our law enforcement to enforce immigration laws, to ask anyone about their immigration status, or detain anyone based on suspicion of being in violation of our immigration laws. Now, that doesn't prohibit ICE from doing its job. ICE is certainly welcome to come in and do their job, and no one's going to stop them. The state of Illinois isn't going to stop them. They have every right. But what they can't do is co-opt our police to do their job for them. ICE has their own budget. They don't need to use our state's resources to do their job. So that's what the Trust Act is. And the Trust Act also prohibits ICE detainers or holds in county jails. And there's very good reasons for that. It's called unlawful custody. ICE detainer requests are not signed by a judge. They're not supported by probable cause, which our Constitution requires when the police arrest somebody, right? Probable cause, that's needed. Or an arrest warrant signed that's been reviewed by a neutral party, a judge, that's due process. Those mechanisms don't exist for the enforcement of immigration law. No judge ever sees an ICE warrant because it's a civil warrant, and there is no mechanism to go in front of a federal judge and say, hey, will you sign this arrest warrant? Because it's civil, it's not criminal. So when our county jail holds somebody after they've been released from criminal custody, but we continue to hold them, that becomes a warrantless arrest, which opens up the county to liability. It becomes unlawful detention. Just like if the police arrested you and said, you know what, we don't have a warrant, we don't have probable cause, we're holding you just because we think you look suspicious. And they held you for 2 days without any charges, then you get to sue the county jail and collect damages for unlawful detention. So the Trust Act, by making it clear, drawing a clear distinction between civil, federal law enforcement and our criminal law enforcement, it eliminates that whole kind of liability. This guy back here has had his hand up for like 2 hours.
Okay, I kind of have a more lengthy question, but the Statue of Liberty says, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe, breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these homeless, tempted tossed to me, and lift my lamp beside the golden door. Why, in a country that has a history so bestowed in immigration, you have, first of all, the white settlers were not even the natives here. And then you have Ellis Island and people, I bet everyone in this room, their family is descended from some sort of European country or maybe a more eastern land. But the point I'm trying to get at is, as an immigration attorney pertaining to immigration culture, why do we have this tend to nationalize our immigration policy? And we have a current president who wants to build a wall, and in reality, most people don't even come here crossing the border. They're on a plane or some other way of getting here, making a wall and a border irrelevant. Why is our culture towards immigration so anti-immigration?
That's an excellent question. And I can throw it back to all of you. What do you think? What do you think? Should immigrants be allowed to come into the United States? Should there be a process for them? Should we let poor people come in? Should we let people whom we were forced from their homes come into this country?
I have something to add. So of course, we're known as a country of immigrants, but we have always kind of been skeptical towards immigrants because I think it was the Irish. We were really hostile towards the Irish when they were like first coming in like waves. So we've always been kind of like that.
Irish need not apply. Those signs were everywhere. Well, and you're absolutely right. Actually, the United States has more had a history of exclusion than inclusion of immigrants, which sounds odd because we are an immigrant nation. In the 1920s, that's when we first passed the Visa Quota Act, actually set up a quota and a process for people coming in. When people previous to that came in through Ellis Island, it's like if you didn't cough and you didn't limp and you had someone in the U.S. to vouch for you, you're in. You're in. So it's pretty easy to come. In the 1920s, we saw the rise of a very strong isolationist policy in our government, fear of other people, of foreigners, fear of radicals, anarchists. And so we started passing these anti-immigrant laws and limiting the number of people who could come and from which areas in the world they could come. The Quotas Act said we need to keep the racial and ethnic balance that we currently have in the United States the same. So we're no longer going to accept any Asian immigrants in the United States. And so Asians were banned outright. We also banned African immigration during this time. We banned Southern European immigration because there were too many Italians and Jews coming over and Romanians. And so we favored Western European immigration, ironically, the Irish. And this was happening in the 1920s. And Congress said, you know what? Actually, the best ethnic balance was the balance that we had in 1890. So we're going to use the 1890 census, which favored Irish immigrants at that time. We had a large number of Irish immigrants coming over because Congress decided the Irish, in fact, were more desirable than any of these other people. So we actually have a history of exclusion. We've always had an ambivalent relationship with immigration in the United States. But it's not a trend I care to see continue. I don't think it's beneficial to us. I think after every time we do whole-scale exclusions of people just because they're from certain countries or certain regions in the world, we end up 10, 20 years later saying, okay, that was a really bad idea. We shouldn't do that. But here we are, again, doing exactly what we did in the 1920s. Yes?
I mean, in the end, isn't it all really, profit-based? We brought in the Chinese to build the railroads. then,
Then we passed the Chinese Exclusion Act to kick them all out after the
well,
railroads were
you know,
built,
laws
yes.
against opium and things like that. You know, we brought in the Irish to do work. They were treated horribly and they were slaves to do work. We brought in Africans to do work. And once we didn't need them anymore, or laws were passed in order to not, persecute people anymore. So once the 13th Amendment was passed, then we had to go into convict leasing and different things like that. So wouldn't it make sense that what we're doing at this point is we're looking to make a profit with the prison industrial complex in order to get immigrants into jail in order to use them for labor or make more money for the prison industrial complex? I mean, doesn't it kind of become a cycle of, we need you right now to make us a profit by working, and then we don't really want you to work anymore, so now we're gonna find a way to get rid of you or make money off of you some other way? I mean, doesn't it really come down to money and power?
You're exactly right. This all comes down to economic demand. So we repealed the Chinese Exclusion Act and the Asian ban during World War II. Because what was going on in World War II? All of our able-bodied men folk were off fighting, and we didn't have enough women to meet the labor demand and the people left behind. So we lifted the bans to bring in immigrants to work in the United States. We also entered into a treaty with Mexico that allowed Mexican workers to come into the United States and work during World War II. But after World War II, when our men came home, then we decided, well, we don't need any more immigrants. And so we ended the Brasiero program, which was the treaty that allowed Mexicans to cross freely between the US and Mexican border to come here and work and go home, etc. And we engaged in a large-scale deportation